Welcome to today's episode of TheSquare, A Curious Conversation. Today, I'm really excited that we're going to be here with my co-host, Robbie Good, who is the Director of Branded Environments at Corgan, and we're going to be having a curious conversation with Jason Roberts. And Jason, it's really kind of hard to put you into a category. You're a musician, you're a serial entrepreneur, you're a designer. We're just gonna call you an all-around creative guy. Tell me a little bit about when you kind of first noticed your desire to be creative and to do creative things.
Yeah, I would say I came from a musical family, a small, like my mom and dad are from small country towns, and everybody sings and everyone plays a guitar or something. So, and early on, I didn't have a lot of patience for learning songs, but I seemed to, if I'd pick up an instrument, I tended to have this default to writing songs, and I don't think I would have ever thought of myself as a songwriter or anything like that. It was kind of out of a lack of patience to learn. Stairway to Heaven. You start the first three notes and you're like, oh, I'll just make my own song because this seems really hard. And I think that just kept happening over and over again, and eventually that led to this path of like, oh, I like to create. Somebody actually gave an analogy of like, what is an artist or or what is the definition of that? It's like somebody who just constantly creates or has this desire to create. And I think if I was going to use a story for me specifically, it was this: I had this propensity to, like, if I picked up a random stringed instrument, my natural proclivity was to actually just start writing something, whether it was good or not. Didn't really matter to me as much as it was just to have, create interesting, funny, quirky, different sounds and things.
That's awesome. So was there a particular instrument that you kind of either started with or kind of fell in love with that really kind of allowed you to have that quirky sound that you're looking for?
Yeah, I've always liked different peculiar instruments. I mean, I liked banjos, but not like 5-string, like clawhammery banjos like you hear from in like old bluegrass. I liked like more of the kind of old style, like traditional jazz, 4-string strumming kind of banjos, and loved the sounds of ukuleles and toy pianos, things that were evocative. And my dad always played a guitar, and he would buy me guitars, and they would constantly break because I would wrestle with friends or something, and the necks would come off, and he'd re-glue them back on. And I had no desire to really kind of like work on it. And then I think the first song I was like that's a cool song. How do you play that? Was White Lions When the Children Cry. I thought, man, that's a pretty hot number there. and so I think I found tablature and attempted to learn that, and it was really difficult, and then started writing my own things. But my early kind of memories of that stuff was finding really bad music and trying to replicate it and fail.
So how did that translate into a design career?
Yeah, that's a stupendous question. I would say, it's interesting on the design stuff, especially for cities. I'll say early memories for me was like walking through New Orleans. My parents, took trips there, and to me, New Orleans was such a strange town, so different from anything else I had ever known. So this, seeing these like old brick streets or cobblestone streets and gas lights and these old buildings that were kind of falling apart, and you had this lightness and this dark. You had voodoo and Catholicism mixed with strip clubs and like nunneries. It made no sense, but it was exciting, and it felt alive, and that made me start thinking about cities. And I think when I originally started actually designing and putting things together in streets to try to kind of replicate the things I was seeing in other places, I failed so often that at some point in time I started paying attention to like, why do some of these work and some of them don't work? And that's where design became kind of tantamount to figuring out what people gravitated towards. So once I started, paying attention, it's like kind of whenever you finally pay attention to typology, right? You never really thought about it before. Then all of a sudden, like, oh, there's fonts. So like, okay, well, and then there's sans serif fonts. Well, okay, I understand that. But then you really start thinking about it deeply, and then realizing that it actually has some type of effect on how you feel about the way you look at things. That to me was, kind of, again, for me, it was attempting to do these things on my own, replicating things I saw, not doing well at it, and trying to reverse engineer why does it work for some people and not for other people. And then at the heart of that was design, I think.
Do you see a link in your proclivity to pick up an instrument and just start playing it yourself? A link between that and the desire to build your own better block, or build your own coffee shop or restaurant or jazz bar?
Yeah, I see. There's definitely a thread between all of these things, and I'm trying to think if it's the design component that's at the base of it. Really, I think what's at the base of the connection between like my jazz bar or the restaurant is this desire to make places that evoke an emotion, and ideally an emotion of like joy or of wonder, and because that's the stuff that moves me. And so if you think about whenever I started doing the Better Block projects, and you take these landscapes that were somewhat barren or blighted, and just maybe overbuilt, and just you start infusing just little design details. So like painting bike lanes and adding string lights and adding cafe seating, adding plants. Really at the end of the day, you're creating this place that people have this emotional response to. I'll say that's similar to music. I remember going to shows or listening to certain songs and having this emotional response to a song. And when I would write music, I would go into it thinking like, how do I also evoke an emotion on something? And Robbie, I know you're a musician as well, and this feeling when you perform something and you see somebody respond back to that, especially if it's joy or tears or whatever. That's very cathartic. And you can sit down and remember when you were writing those things and thinking like, man, I was emotional when I was writing this piece, and I'm really glad I'm able to convey that during this performance. And it's also evoking a similar response to what I felt when I was writing. And again, that thread runs through all of these things, whether it's Rellers Hall with a jazz venue, and knowing that I want people to come in here. I want them to, in their mind, like what is in your mind's eye about like kind of the ideal jazz setting. And for me, it was like, it's a dark club, it's a small room, it's maybe smoky, it's somebody playing a piano, it's a low light, it's that to me is exciting, trying to pair up the idea in your mind with manifesting it somehow to ultimately again create an emotional response, and hopefully one again that's moving at the end.
Sort of like creating the perfect playlist, but with like the physical environment.
I like that. Yeah, our mixtape genre, which is just one of those things that kids these days just aren't gonna like. It's gonna be so hard to kind of try to explain. We used to have to listen to the radio and wait and hit the record button, and then the DJ was talking, and we'd be like, shut up, I gotta capture this, and then you stop it, and then so that kind of thing.
The era of making a mixtape for a girl at school is completely dead now. It's just you send her a Spotify playlist.
Yeah, it's just Spotify. It's not the same. You had to really work. You had to call the radio station, hope they would play it, wait for 3 or 4 hours. It'd be on at 2 a.m. and you're like, damn, yeah.
So, certainly one of the first things I remember reading about you or hearing about you is Better Block. Explain to people a little bit what Better Block is.
Yeah, so really, Better Block, kind of what the genesis of that was seeing these places I liked when I travel, or even seeing them in pictures online. And so like, let's say, you go to Holland and you ride on this incredible bike lane, or you go to Germany and you have this amazing experience in a German beer garden, and coming home and trying to explain to people like, we should really, paint a bike lane, like, because I rode on this one in Holland and it was amazing, or in Germany, you should build, we should build a beer garden because I had this experience in the English gardens in Munich, and it was so profound. And the fact that we could all get beer in a public setting, it's a public park, but it was, it's sponsored by by the country, and so as I went down that path and I was trying to advocate for those things, what would happen time and again is well, first of all, people say, well, it's illegal, it's not allowed, it's not zoned or what have you. And the other issue I faced was if I tried to say, well, we should do this, I was constantly kind of bombarded with worst case scenarios of why. Well, you don't do that, and this is the reason why. It's going to be an abject failure, and it's going to create Carmageddon if you change our streets, and it's going to be you can't just let people drink beer in the park. Yeah, they do it all over the world, but if it happens here, it's going to be mass chaos. So I realized that process to make those things happen would take years or decades, and I really just am the most impatient person ever. And so I was like, well, why don't I just do it like a party, and we'll just kind of create it and have people experience it? Because again, I'm drawn to the idea that people make decisions based on their emotions more so than on data. In fact, if anything, data can almost hurt you, because when you try to say well, the data says this, people start questioning the data sources, if it doesn't jive with their personal belief system. But what you couldn't argue with is a feeling, right? And so people make those decisions based on emotions. So I'm like, if I can transform this space, I can paint the bike lane, add the cafe seating. Yeah, they might tell me it's going to be Carmageddon and all these other things, but if I do it overnight, we bring people together, they'll experience it, and they'll be like, I don't know what all this stuff is, but I like how this makes me feel. So Better Block was all about this concept of let's rapidly go in and create that space and give people a taste of it. So we'll paint the bike lane, add the cafe seating, add all these things, and then see how it works, have a conversation about how it works, and then pull it all out. And then that way we're getting away, we're doing myth busting, and we're letting people kind of try it before you buy it. And I found that process really knocked out all these traps that were set up that we because again, you're trying to get people to buy into something that's very foreign, and we all know change is hard, but again, if you could give people that experience and they realize it's not as scary as they thought, and I have this happen to me time and again. Just recently we built parklets, but getting those off the ground in Dallas, I've been working on it for 10 years. And it was such a struggle, and even months before we built ours, which we just built ours illegally, it was, we kept hearing it's going to be drunk drivers are going to hit it. It's going to be, it's going to be create all of these traffic pattern issues, and we're missing parking anyways. You can't do that, and so I had to go in and just build it. And then once we built it, there was no drunk drivers hitting it. Everyone said homeless people be sleeping in it. Didn't happen. All these things, and now we have this beautiful parklet, and it got a lot of national attention, and it's actually what we want the city of Dallas to look like. I think we want it to look like an outdoor, vibrant setting. And so, anyways, it's a long answer to your question of what a Better Block is. It's really a mock-up of a space to show its potential, and then not to go in and presume this is the best way. It's just to say does this work or does it not work? And there might very well be instances where it doesn't, but let's use the scientific theory. Let's try some things, see what happens, and if it fails, we'll take the parts out that don't work out. But if the stuff that does work, let's continue with those and build upon them. So
a big part of the idea behind Better Block and some of the structures you guys put together, are rapid prototypes, and a lot of different industries, take that approach. When you look around the world, which industry excites you in a way that is pushing boundaries towards the integration of critical ideas and technologies?
Well, I don't know, critical ideas and technologies, but again, one of the big inspiration I often tell people for me is, and it comes back to music. It's like what Jack White is doing. And taking, he's starting with this, garage band in the late 90s, early aughts. That's got so many constraints to it, but it ends up making this great music. And then after that, saying, well, what else do I do from here? he goes into the world of collaborations, and then eventually starts going into like, let's start pressing our own vinyl and developing his own record store, and in promoting kind of this little lifestyle of analog music. And then from there, now he's off to the races, and he's going into making baseball bats and other things like that. I love when people don't stick within this one category, but absolutely see like, how does this affect other parts of life, and how do we start breaking those things out? I'm sure there's probably better examples that are, Elon Musk is making rockets, and then like boring systems or whatever you call them. But that's that's probably far more grandiose. Jack White seemed far more accessible, even though he's got a Grammys and all these other things. But it seemed like, being a musician at my base, I loved that idea.
Well, certainly, innovation and creating new things are kind of big buzz topics right now. Should there be a focus on transformation and repurposing and reusing what we already have, whether that's in Better Block or design in general? How does that play in? I mean, one of the things that I love is in a lot of your music, you're looking backwards a lot of times for inspiration of things that you're creating that are new. How does that play into design?
Well, I think kind of the huge opportunity really is going to be, I mean, you say retrofit, and really it's with the infill opportunities. The tricky part we face here is with any kind of infill, which, I used to be one of those people that, we get upset because we build these suburbs and we keep sprawling. But then I realized whenever you start doing neighborhood work and you start trying to infill things, it's so hard to again, since the community is so reticent for change, even though everyone says we need change, they're absolutely terrified of the unknown. And they make with all these presumptions. You can see why we continue to sprawl out, right? Because it's like, well, I can take this empty field over here, and the government will just build some pipes and some roads out here, and I can make my development. I'm not have to do any kind of long-term, like, kind of try to convincing of why this is a good or bad thing. But I'll say ultimately, there's the opportunity is that we've like, people talk about Dallas having like affordable housing issues, but we're so crazy sprawling. Like it's ridiculous how sprawling we are, and it's like, that's really it should not be a problem at all. I know we've talked about the idea of auxiliary dwelling units and granny flats, but absolutely, like, we could give those opportunities to residents to fix that problem. But the backside of that is that people are afraid of density. And so that's the irony of all of this, is like, the things we love about cities are like, parks that are full of people, the buses that are being used, public transit's being used well, and all these little tiny shops, mom and pop shops. Well, that only works with density. So it's this, and people, they hear the word density in their mind, they think Shanghai. And so you have to kind of like back in that a bit. So the interesting thing, it's like when I hear people saying they're opposed to gentrification, but they're also opposed to density, and you're like, well, we can fix some of these problems, but if you're opposed to both of these things, I don't know how I'm going to. You've taken away all the tools, because we're dealing with a geometry issue at this point. There's only so, you've got people, and your population increases, and you only have so much space you've created for that, the people that are there. We're in a dilemma. So really, we're like saying, well, we don't want to deal with that problem, so we're going to just continue sprawling out. So, because again, that's less of a headache. So yeah, to me, it's getting our heads around the infill issue, being okay with that, being okay with, having creative new things happening in neighborhoods. I had somebody tell me once that was much wiser than me, because again, my background wasn't urban planning, urban design. I was IT consulting. As a transportation engineer, his name Keith Minoy, city of Dallas. Y'all may know him. He's a really great guy, but retired now. But he was like, one of the major issues Dallas did that created problems for us is we went all in with a single family detached home. And I hadn't really thought about that. I didn't even know what that meant really at the time. But then as you kind of extrapolated that, like, oh, that it does make sense, because, we took a city block, and if I were in like a suburb of London, Ealing, that the same size block would probably have row houses with 150 people in them comfortably. But we'll take a city block, neighborhood block in Dallas, and we're going to put 25 people in it. And so, and then, argue about the idea to add 35 people in that space and say why that's a bad thing. So that's, I think that's where our challenge is going to be through all this work, is designing these infill concepts, showing people that, look, it's not terrifying, it's not the end of the world, and it actually can be built by the neighbors and the residents. So this fear of developers or outside speculators, well, that can go away if you, again, give the tools back to the neighborhood.
And you've talked a little bit about, the neighborhood and the importance of the community. Do you think there's important questions that designers aren't asking themselves or their clients, and especially the community?
Well, yeah. I think there's a bit of a... I would actually probably flip that on its head, I think, because the problem is, I think we know the questions to ask, like what's wrong or what's missing or how do we improve things. Part of the issue I found we face, and this is probably, I think, one of the inherent worries about human-centered design, is like, just ask people what they want. Listen, we say, and ask them what they want. The thing is, though, the average resident has not been exposed. Like you say, what should we add bike infrastructure? Like, yes, we should have bike infrastructure. Then we ask, well, what kind? Well, the average Joe or Jane has not seen all of the different options when it comes to bicycle infrastructure that's out there. And typically what's going to happen is, if when I ask somebody, like, what do you want for your neighborhood, they're like, I want to be able to drive and park at the front door, but then I also want, I want parks full of people, and I want these classic main streets, and all these things that don't work together, that are kind of counter. And so I think one of the issues that we have to understand as the designers is that you have to, it's kind of like being a doctor, right? And if I ask my kids, like, well, what should, you're eating poorly, what should you eat? And they're like, I should just eat donuts all the time. And well, like, no, that's not healthy, and you're just going to gain weight and things are going to get worse. And you're trying to, like, but what is this thing that, because if I just give you salads, you're going to get upset and you're going to, like, revolt. And so there's going to be this kind of mixture in between. And I think that's what we're having to figure out as the design community, is like listening to what the community is saying the issue is, but then realizing, like, the community has not seen all of the different medicine and tools that are out there to fix these problems. And many of them are going to seem very counterintuitive to what they know. And which, again, was why the Better Block came up with, like, some of these concepts, like, if I'm going to add a bike lane, I'm going to have to take away a car lane. And that's going to be pretty jarring in the beginning. Just like, you're taking away donuts from the kids. You're just giving them so I can't just give them only salad. They're going to have to figure out this kind of hybrid approach, which is kind of the worst. We're basically building the futon for communities, which is not comfortable for sleeping or sitting, right? So it's like we're designing these infrastructure that's not great for driving or bicycling. But ultimately, we're trying to get to this point where we're creating, the optimal, equitable solution that's going to promote a healthy lifestyle, and that's going to promote neighborhood. And so, anyways, that's, it's not an easy answer to your question, but again, I think that we so quickly want to jump to, like, well, just do what the neighborhood wants. And again, I don't think the neighborhood knows all of the options, because they haven't ridden in a Dutch-style bicycle lane. They haven't, had an experience in a Zocalo in Mexico City with a marketplace that way. And so to understand, like, well, we need to have markets. Well, what kind of markets? There's lots of markets. Or, what scale should those look like? And do you want it to promote people walking in their neighborhood, or do you want it to just facilitate a new business opportunity? It's going to employ a bunch of people. Do you want to have small business opportunity? I mean, all these questions. And again, it's I think the onus is on us to go, as the designers, to learn a lot, study a lot, take in a lot of opportunities and experiences, And again, find a way to ease these into people's hands, just to again test drive them if they can, if you will, and then hopefully say, okay, we tried these 4 bike lanes out, we tried the Shero, we tried the painted bike lane, we tried the buffer, and we tried the grade separated. That grade separated by far the best. I'm like, and you could know that because you're like, well, yeah, we know this because the Dutch figured that out 50 years ago. And they tried all the other things. We're just having to work our way through their process now, but we could go right to that if we wanted to. And so that to me is the trick, that the struggle that we're faced with.
So it's an education. You use Better Block as an education tool, essentially.
Yeah, because again, I'll go back to bike infrastructure because it's the easiest thing, and I know something, you as a cyclist yourself, Robbie, you understand this as well. And you and I are both not recreational style cyclists. We're not spandexy cyclists, right? We will ride a bicycle to go to the grocery store, or to go
spandexy cyclists.
That's
Got
right.
it.
We're like the go to the bar and grab a beer cyclists, right? And so, what is the most comfortable way to do that? That's going to make me want to do that over driving a car there. And so, I think that giving, you've traveled, fortunately, I've traveled, and we've experienced all of these. And the nice thing, when you've seen a slate of options, you can see how it affects the most marginalized in the community. And that's really what I'm working at for doing with this work is like, I'm seeing like, well, what I'm seeing with the Dutch style bike infrastructure compared to what we're seeing in the Dallas style bike infrastructure is I'm seeing a lot more women ride bicycles. I'm seeing a lot more older people ride bicycles. It's not just dudes in spandex, right? And so why is that? And the reason why is it feels more accessible. It feels more equitable. It feels it feels safer. And all of those things that are creating hurdles or limitations to different groups of people. And so anyways, that's part of the reason why demonstration, I feel, is so important.
So I love the idea of kind of trying different things out, not just to see what works, but what works for a certain area, right? Because what may work in Oak Cliff may not work in Plano. The idea, though, is that there needs to be the overall goal of having an increase in cyclists or these spaces. But how does, now that we're kind of in, or hopefully moving into at least a post-COVID or a post-peak of the pandemic world, does that affect that? I mean, you're talking about spaces where a lot of people would gather. Is that affected by this, this pandemic?
Well, I think what we're seeing happen now, just a lot of random things. And again, this is kind of, myth busting, and we're getting a chance to kind of override a lot of rules that would have probably taken years to get through. And the quick one I can give example of, again, is like the parklets that we built out. So, these are basically just taking a parking space and making a deck and taking away the car space. Well, that would have been a battle had I done that prior to COVID. It was a battle. People were trying to do this. There was a girl in the neighborhood, literally for 2.5 years, has been trying to get a parklet built, and he could not get it through the city's kind of process. So that's one example. You hear about to-go drinks being a thing right now. Like, that would have never happened had we not had. And then and the reason it wouldn't happen is everyone would come up with every worst case scenario why that didn't happen. And then finally, once the rules are out the window, we all try it and are like, oh yeah, it wasn't the end of the world, and why haven't we kept doing this? And then the governor comes back and says, like, we're probably got to keep that. That's not a big deal. Well, that really sucks if you think about it. We had to have a pandemic to finally upend something that we're all like, well, that was stupid. Like, we're adults. Yeah. We're probably going to be okay. But how do we peel some of this stuff back so we can experiment? But I think the opportunity, though, is going to be in the outdoors, right? It's people are going outside now because they have to go outside more if they want to be social, and we're social beings, so we're going to do that. And it's recognizing all of the gaps and the problems with being outside here. And now, since, if anything, it's this chance to kind of like finally take a lot of this infrastructure and as an urbanist, we kind of all belabor the point how, the car is the reason why we've created a lot of these problems. And I completely agree with that. But it is so hard to unpack that because we live our lives based on our conveniences, even though we lament that, right? Because we all say like, I wish we had more slow food movements and people taking their time and having deeper conversations, but we also don't want to give up fast food and these other things and the conveniences that come with those. And those conveniences in our lives basically overtake the things that we actually appreciate about life itself. Because we're trying to get to something faster so we can slow down, ultimately.
Yeah.
And so now there's been a chance to kind of take out that thing that we're just using to get back and forth to places and saying, well, how do I just address the thing, the space itself? And so to me, that is the big opportunity right now. It's for us to look outside in Dallas. And again, you think about it, people don't think about Dallas as an outdoor environment. I started an outdoor retail store based on this very premise, was because why is Austin considered an outdoor space, but Dallas isn't? We have pretty much a very similar temperature. We're in the same state. But it's really just kind of a how we address the outdoors, they engage their rivers, they create nice pathways and trailheads, and they're finding ways to make this irresistible. And Dallas finds everything it can to kind of like, well, we've got an outdoor, but we don't really think about that outdoor, and we're gonna do everything inside. So that's, to me, it's exciting for us to start thinking of ourselves differently and start applying the fixes in the built environment to hopefully make the places more desirable.
So tell me a little bit, we'll shift gears real quick. When you're working with your team, and whether it's on a restaurant concept or music or design or whatnot, how do you foster creativity in the team?
Let's think. Well, so we have a pretty collaborative environment in everything I do. I really love having a team. I like that salon style environment where everyone is kind of, we're very supportive of our staff and all the things we do, of getting out there and taking on new experiences. And so at Better Block, for instance, we have a budget set aside. So we have a staff member that loves to go to the New York Design show every year, and I love when our team, like, let's sit down, what movies should we be watching right now? What's happening and what books should we be reading? And everybody just kind of having a brain dump together and talking about like movements and things that are happening around the world. And then trying to kind of identify, like, well, how can we infuse some of these ideas or these concepts into the spaces that we have right now, and how can we promote some of these ideas? I mean, I can tell you, like, any average day, like, I'll be sitting in Revelers Hall with my music director, and I'm like, and say, I saw, this great musical. How do we apply, how do we play some of those musical songs with our house band? And how do we start reaching out to the theater groups in the town and have them be involved with this? But then I'll turn around and go to Better Block, and we'll have, another group of folks at the table and say, like, somebody will say, there's this great, furniture group out of Scandinavia. How do we get them how do we start infusing some of the ideas that they're putting in the built environment in our own work as well? So it's a very much a collaborative setting with creatives.
All right, so as we start to wrap up then, Jason, is there, what's the project that you haven't done yet that you really want to do?
I would really love to do some type of mixed use development, do a full on kind of help bring in a bunch of different architects, a bunch of different designers, urban planners, and then also bring a bunch. See, what I'm frustrated now about when you look at the classic kind of Main Street in the U.S. now, it's a single block development done by one master developer and typically one or two architects. And if you look at like any classic Main Street that's over 100 years old, that's not the way it was built in the past. It was, a block that there's all these small parcels that you or I or a small organization we may have had or a group of friends or what have you, or nonprofits would have owned a slice of this, and then we would have all built together and created this coral reef thing. And it would have all been slightly different because we're using different designers and different, materials. There's probably an overarching, a plan in place to how these have to be configured, though. But to me, it's creating something from scratch like that and letting everybody come into the mix and own a piece of that. So again, and getting back to a style of development, because I don't think people realize that this seems so far-fetched, and how do you build these great places? But half the places that you love around the world that are working in Paris or something, that are 500 years old, or what you might love, were probably built by illiterate people, that are still working great and that are solid as a rock, to this day. So why did it work then and it doesn't work now? And I think it's because we've allowed kind of only experts and only a select few of industries and resources to be used in this to create these things, or certain types of capital to be used in these things. And we haven't realized you have all of the resources you need right there in the neighborhood to make that great place, that same great place you saw in Montmartre, Paris, you could actually make here. Unfortunately, it just seems outside of our purview because we don't know how to manage the equation of co-responsibility. We just think I'll have one group with a hedge fund, that's going to come out here and hopefully drop $180 million on, one building.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you after that happens.
You're going to be building one of the buildings, so.
Yeah, there we go. Jason, thank you so much for talking with us, and Robbie, thank you so much for being here with me as well. Thank you for watching and or listening, depending on which version of the podcast you're listening to, and we'll make sure to see you next week.